Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I've recorded much. I've been busy with a film, but something new today. Probably won't go on too long, but I've been meaning to do a review of a soundtrack to a Coup D'Etat for quite a long time. I picked it up about 3 months ago after I heard that it received an Oscar nomination just this past year for a best documentary feature film. It didn't win. I can't remember who won. Does anyone remember who won? Anyway, leave a comment. But it had a really compelling storyline. And so I want to talk a little bit about the storyline. I want to talk a little bit about, just give a little review of the film, some of my criticisms, some things I liked about the film, some things I didn't like about the film. But so yeah, let's kind of get into it. Let's pull this up. Whoops, that didn't work very well, did it? Here, that's a bit better. Those of you who are interested in the film, it's a film about the Cold War, but it also has kind of a jazz history subplot. And actually, going into watching the film, I thought the jazz history subplot was going to be more pronounced than it was, but I'm already diving into the criticism. So let's talk a little bit more about the film. You can also, as you can see here, you can stream it. I think it's on Apple TV now. Let's have a look. It's on. Well, it says it's on Apple. Oh, but you need to rent. It's $4.99. Which is probably not a bad deal because I think I spent something like $30 or something on the DVD, and I never watch DVDs anymore. Anyway, so I don't think it's free yet. Well, if you have Canopy, it says it's free. Anyway, check it out here. The Just Watch is a pretty good website that lists where you can find screenings, where you can stream things online. Okay, the film is about, it's a Cold War film, but it's also a film about the decolonial process that happened in the Belgian Congo, or what used to be called the Belgian Congo, in the late 50s and the early 60s. The Belgian Congo, and this is kind of an interesting, almost contemporary component to the story, is right in the middle of Africa, deep in the middle of Africa, and it also is a country that has a very violent past, a very violent colonial past, with Belgium, of course, that ruled the Congo for many decades. And it's also a story about the so-called critical materials that were and are found in that part of the world, in that part of Africa. Principally uranium. So I guess that's part of the critical materials, or the uranium, of course, which is crucial for nuclear power and nuclear arms, is the link to the Cold War, or one of the links to the Cold War. So, so effectively, the story is about how the Congo looks for and searches for independence in the late 50s, works with other African countries, works through what came to be known as the non-aligned movement through the United Nations and elsewhere around the globe. And really, it was a set of, I think it was a set of countries that were often found themselves in the middle of the Cold War, being pulled or pushed by the US and the Americans' allies, the Western allies, and of course the Soviet Union on the other side, the so-called communist world. Okay, so so it's an interesting Cold War story. It's a story about as the title of the film would suggest, about the removal of a head of government, the removal of the first president of the Republic of Congo, 1961, Patrice Lumumba. So, but yet at the same time, it's also a very, of course, as many people know, a very divisive time in the United States. It's a very divisive time around the world through, of course, the Cold War, but it's also a very divisive time within the United States with regards to civil rights, or the lack thereof of civil rights. So there are a number of threads, there are a number of stories that are being told, I think, at once in this film, and bring together a number of stories to talk about this process of decolonialization. And so the other component to the film, which again also caught my eye, is the role that jazz, or the history of jazz, or the role that jazz legends, some of the biggest names in American jazz, Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, and Nina Simone, and how those artists were pulled into this conflict, pulled into this history, were asked by the U.S. Government to, and paid by, of course, the U.S. government to play a number of concerts, and to effectively become kind of goodwill ambassadors, and or as some have suggested, kind of almost puppets, right? Controlled by the Americans, who didn't really know the role that they were playing at the time. Anyway, maybe we'll talk a little bit about that, because that's perhaps one of the criticisms that I had. Anyway, the film itself is it's a long film. I think it's about 150 minutes, so it's a commitment. It's over a couple hours, and actually I stopped it halfway through and watched the second half. And I think it's kind of a newsreel style, if you know what I mean, a newsreel style film. So there's no narration as such, that there's clips, historical clips taken from film, from broadcasts, from all these different archival sources. So it has this kind of what I would call like a found footage kind of style to it, aesthetic to it, which means that there's just a lot of different clips with different colors and different qualities to it, different resolutions, of course, and they're edited together very quickly. So it's kind of clip upon clip, and so I found it to be quite difficult to watch, I guess is what I'm trying to say. A little bit kind of tiresome on the eyes, and it has like almost kind of a feeling of a MTV video where it's just cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And so for over 2 hours, you just feel like you're kind of inundated by these images. So I think that's partly why I kind of stopped the film halfway through, because I was just kind of tired. And I think because of the lack of, perhaps because of that, the adoption of that style, I found that the story of the film was kind of lost a little bit, and there was some repetition of establishing some of the aspects of the story, some of the key players in the story, but it just seemed to kind of go around and round a little bit before it started to move into the coup stage of the story. So anyway, so that's it was it kind of reminded me a little bit of the recent Bowie film. Have people seen that? What's it? Moonrise Kingdom? Is that what it was called? Anyway, it was the most recent one, and I think it played at a lot of IMAX cinemas. And I streamed that as well about 6 months back, and it was, again, a lot of archival footage, kind of boom, 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 back to back to back, and I had the same reaction kind of halfway through. It was kind of like, oh, enough already. Anyway, so I also, excuse me, in terms of the history, I thought was really really captivating. It's not a very well known story. It's not a story that those of us who grew up in Canada or the United States or quote unquote, in the West, we learned about necessarily in school, or even in university. But I thought, so some of it I found really captivating. I learned a lot in the film, but I also thought that it spent a lot of time talking about the United Nations, and much less on actually the Cold War. and the dynamics that were going on, of course, between the United States, the USSR, and different proxies. So I didn't get the feeling that this was necessarily a Cold War, oddly, a Cold War story. It seemed to be more of a story um, about the United Nations and how the United Nations were at that time quite compromised or had to appease certain powers, principally those who are interested in, again, the critical materials in the Congo. So that I was a little disappointed by, but I think that the major issue for me with the film is that it introduced, again, these there was kind of a lost opportunity, I think, because it introduced these really larger than life jazz, what did I call them, legends before, like Armstrong and Gillespie, um, and Simone, and who else, a number of others. Those are the ones that are popping into my head right now. Max Roach, sorry, that was the other one that I was trying to think of. And again, I think there was a lost opportunity because you never really fully understood how much they knew about what was going on, right? Obviously, making money as jazz artists in the 60s was a huge deal. Obviously, there was a tremendous amount of racism in the United States that African American jazz artists faced. So there were a number of competing and overlapping issues that were happening at the time. But there was only once or twice these references. At one point in time, I believe Nina Simone kind of caught wind of what was going on and refused to go on. And then Louis Armstrong similarly kind of refused to perform at one show. But it was very fleeting. And it was those moments that I was really looking for more nuance, right? I really wanted to know more about how these artists were manipulated or maybe not manipulated, or how they saw their role as quote unquote ambassadors during this obviously very conflicted time. So some of the footage of seeing those artists in Africa, in the Congo and elsewhere around Africa, was really compelling, was very interesting. And again, it added another layer, a very rich, a very important layer to the histories about Black nationalism and the civil rights movement in the United States, of course. But I think I ended up being a little frustrated, wanting to know more about the kind of personal and also artistic politics that that were a big part of the story. So it seemed like the film was definitely more of a story of the Belgian Congo, of course, the role of the United Nations, a bit less so about the Cold War, but the musical side of things just seemed to be a little forced, and I kind of found it more as a little bit of wallpaper, right? And the way that music was used in the film kind of came in and out and didn't seem to be a central part of the story that was being told. It seemed to be kind of glued on here and there. So anyway, I enjoyed it. Would I recommend it? Probably not, just because it's just too long, and I found it hard to follow. And ultimately, again, the story of jazz and the jazz artist just did not shine through enough for me. Anyway, so that's my take on Soundtrack to a Coup D'Etat. Those of you who are interested in issues of politics, and particularly the Cold War, if you haven't had a chance yet, I interviewed the editors of this book called Free Jazz Communism. And this is the story of the Archie Shepp, Bill Dixon concert at the World Festival of Youth and Students in Helsinki in 1962, which is also a really complicated and nuanced story about the Cold War and the way it impacted the jazz community in the U.S., in the United States, and elsewhere. So I'd highly recommend that book, and I'll put a link below to my interview with the editors. So feel free to check that out. If you haven't yet, make sure to hit subscribe. Come back and check out some more of my content, and I'll see you all soon. Take care, everyone.